6 months to respond to an office action. Since attorneys carry a docket of cases adapted to fill all their time, an attorney in most instances requires the full 6 months to respond to an outstanding office action. Industrious attorneys with relatively light dockets might respond in 5 months' time. This may also happen when the attorney is trying to get a little ahead so he can go on a vacation. There are rare instances of record when an attorney had taken some action in 3 or 4 months, but here in the Tearproof paper case I had actually gone for an interview on the very first day. I couldn't possibly go back the following Monday. My pride would not allow me. I waited until Tuesday. By that time I had gone over the entire rejection and planned my complete response to the examiner. I sat down with Mr. Krome on Tuesday morning and talked steadily for 15 minutes before I realized he was watching me instead of paying attention to the case. I said, "What's the matter?" He said wonderingly, "I've never seen you like this before. You're acting almost as unreasonably as an inventor. You don't even want to hear what I have to say about this case. You should relax, Mr. Saddle. You are here as an advocate, not as a midwife." "I don't think that's very funny, Mr. Krome." I proceeded to explain the high merit of the case, and he seemed to listen then. Before I left, he promised to give the case careful consideration. This was all he ever promised, so I thanked him and went back to my office. I filed my amendment in the case the next day. It was 8 months before I got the next office action. Callahan returned in 6 months and immediately opened a project on the Tearproof paper. The two of us sat down together to determine the best way to handle the research. I said, "Henry, we've already drawn up a complete research program. All we have to do is follow it." "We have?" Callahan was surprised. "Sure," and I laid out in front of him a copy of our patent application and rifled through its pages. "All we have to do is go through all the examples here to make certain they all work. If they do, the program will be complete, except for the product itself and commercial production. Our patent application will make the best research guide we could get." "Why, certainly," said Callahan. "We have already spent a great deal of time working out all kinds of substitute and equivalent reactions. It's all here. Good. I'll set it up." Callahan began distributing the work to various groups, and I went back to my office. Every Friday afternoon thereafter I went out to the laboratories to see how things were coming along. They came along well. From the beginning the actual results reached by the research teams matched the predictions we had made in our patent application. At the Friday afternoon meetings Callahan and I got into the habit of tossing pleased and knowing glances at each other as the streams of data continued to confirm our work. Several months rolled happily by. Then came a letter from the Leif Rude Consultants Incorporated in Boston. The letter said that their people understood that the Marchare Laboratories had under development a remarkably strong paper, and they would be very much interested in discussing licensing possibilities with us. I grabbed the letter and stormed into Mr. Spardleton's office. "Just read this," I almost yelled as I handed him the letter. "This is the outfit that hired Callahan's technician. Now they know all about the Tearproof paper. That technician has told them everything. I think we ought to sue them. Inducing disclosure of trade secrets or something." I added a great deal more as Mr. Spardleton finished the letter and sat holding it, looking up at me as I paced back and forth in front of his desk. As I walked and talked, I finally became conscious of the fact that Mr. Spardleton was waiting for me to finish. I could tell by the expression on his face. I pulled up in front of him and fell quiet. He said, "Don't you feel it is significant that this letter was sent to us, lawyers for Marchare Laboratories, rather than direct to the laboratories?" I thought about it, and he continued, "Furthermore, as I understand it, the Leif Rude people have a good reputation." That was right, too, and I saw what he was driving at. People of good reputation don't try to pull a fast one by immediately alerting the lawyers for the other side. In fact, when I stopped to think about it, I could see that they were bending over backwards to be careful in this situation. Mr. Spardleton said as he handed back the letter, "I suggest you clear with Dr. Marchare and then make arrangements to talk to these people and see if you can negotiate some kind of profitable license. Marchare is pretty fully committed right now, and I don't think he has time to exploit this paper, even if it turns out to amount to something." I looked at him aghast that he should still be doubtful of the paper at this late stage of the game. He saw my look and said, "Oops, I mean this milestone in paper technology once it is announced to the world." That seemed better, more to the point. I called Dr. Marchare and found that Mr. Spardleton was right as usual. Dr. Marchare would welcome a beneficial licensing arrangement. I then called the Rude Associates on the phone. It seemed more expeditious than writing. I set up a meeting date as soon as possible, 1 week away. The day before I left for Boston I checked in with Callahan to make certain all of our data were correct. We went over every aspect of the tear-proof paper case. I picked out a dozen good samples of the paper of varying composition and thickness and put them in my briefcase along with a copy of the patent application. I had decided that I might even show them a copy of the application if it might help show what a marvelous discovery we had made. Callahan and I shook hands solemnly, and he wished me the best of luck. I went back to my office for a final quick check, got interested in Zabel's book, and went home without my briefcase. There was no harm done. My plane did not leave until 10 in the morning, and I had planned to go back to the office anyway. I said goodbye to Susan and Mr. Spardleton, retrieved my briefcase from over by the radiator where Susan had put it the night before, and caught the plane. It was a cold, damp day, and the threat of rain was in the air. In Boston I caught a cab for the Massachusetts Avenue laboratories of Rude Associates. Dr. Rude himself was at the meeting, along with half a dozen of his associates. Dr. Rude was a small man, dapper, totally unlike a research chemist, and his speech and manner were as impeccable as his dress. Only his hands were a giveaway. They were stained with yellow and black stains that looked completely out of place on the man. Dr. Rude opened the meeting with an explanation concerning the technician he had hired from the Marchare laboratories 2 years earlier. "Just a week ago," said Dr. Rude, "we put him on a problem of paper chemistry. He told us that the properties we sought, and more, had already been found by your laboratory. He said no more, and we would not have allowed him to say any more, except that you were the patent lawyer who was working on the case. That is all we know about it. We hope you have something of mutual interest, but we don't know any more than what I have told you." I said, "Thank you, Dr. Rude. I understand how it was. I assure you it never crossed our minds down in Washington that anything could have been out of line in any matter whatsoever." The assembled group smiled, and I smiled back, and we all felt friendly with one another. Dr. Rude cleared his throat and said, "Well, is there anything you can tell us about this about a paper having some of these very interesting properties?" I said, "There is a great deal I can tell you about the paper we have, but suppose I let you see some specimens before I say anything. There's nothing like the actual goods themselves to do most of the talking." We all laughed as I took a half dozen 12 by 12 hand sheets out of my briefcase and passed them around the table. I watched the chemist finger the sheets, savoring their soft coolness, and I heard the whispered comments, "Good hand," "Excellent softness," "Fine color," and a few others. Dr. Rude said, "Are these breaking samples, Mr. Saddle? Do you mind if we tear them?" Well, you can see that this was the question I was waiting for. I sat back and allowed a slight smile to play over my face. I said, "Oh no, gentlemen, go ahead and tear them." I saw several of the people take the sheets between their thumbs and forefingers and gently pull. I saw the sheets tighten momentarily, and then, as if the sheets were no more than ordinary cleansing tissue, I saw the fibers pull apart as each man easily tore the sheet in half. I felt the blood drain from my face, and it seemed to me that my pounding heart must have been visible right through my clothes. I swallowed and tried to say something, although I had no clear idea of what I was going to say. Words would not come. I leaned over and took another sheet from my briefcase and tugged at it. It tore in half with practically no effort. I took another, same results, and still another. I dimly realized that all the people at the meeting were staring at me, but I wasn't concerned. I knew something must be wrong with all the specimens. Possibly I had placed regular cleaning tissues in my briefcase. Or maybe Susan, but even as I thought it, I knew such a mistake was impossible. I reached over and tried tearing one of the sheets I had passed out to the others. It tore into quarters as easily as it had torn into halves. That finished me. I leaned back and looked around at the silent group and wondered what Mr. Spardleton would have said at a time like that. I started to smile and discovered that my original smile was still frozen on my face. I stood up and began retrieving the torn papers. They passed them back to me without saying anything. I replaced them in my briefcase, closed it, said, "Gentlemen, Christmas falls on Friday this year," and walked out. It was raining outside, but I scarcely noticed. I hailed a cab to the Logan airport, changed my reservation